Hello, third year, and welcome to this next lesson as part of your biology course during Kinross High's virtual school. Today, we're going to be focusing on potential impacts on biodiversity. So, prior until now, we've looked at the terms we might use to study ecology, such as population or community, or indeed the word biodiversity itself, which just means the variety of different species we have in an environment. We've also been looking at the relationships between different organisms, such as the fact that they may have biotic relationships and influence each other through being predators or prey, through being competition, and also the fact that they'll interact with each other through their feeding relationships, which we can see in a food web. We also finished off by looking at the fact that when you add or remove an organism from its food web, so from the environment that it's in, that can have quite a significant impact on the organisms around it. What we're going to look at in the next few lessons will be the sorts of things that might impact the biodiversity of an area. So, as I've just said, you may have a species added or removed from a food web. How might that happen? How might an organism end up being removed from an environment entirely? We'll have a wee look at some of that in the next few lessons. This lesson is going to focus pretty much on natural disasters, and so how these events may occur naturally and what sort of things might happen. So we'll be looking to find out how natural disasters can impact biodiversity, and you need to be able to list some natural disasters and explain how one of these can impact biodiversity. So, different sorts of things that can affect biodiversity. Well, as we've already seen, we have various biotic factors, and a biotic factor, remember, is a living factor. Have a wee think, what sort of biotic factors can you remember? You might remember disease, competition, predation, or grazing. We also have abiotic factors, or non-living factors. And what might they be? Have a little think. So you might have thought of temperature, rainfall, soil pH, wind speed, light intensity, or many others. There's lots of abiotic factors that might influence our biodiversity. And if any of those become unbalanced, it can affect the abundance of a species in an ecosystem. So how many members of that species there are. And if a species is added or removed, that's going to have an impact on the food web that it's part of, and consequently the other organisms that are in that ecosystem. Now, natural disasters can be particularly challenging in an ecosystem, mostly because they are sudden and unexpected. Organisms and species are not given any opportunity to adapt or change to the scenario that they now find themselves in. So a natural disaster is usually caused by something in the environment, but can have quite a significant impact on the organisms around. Now, before I go on, I'd quite like it if you could pause the video, make sure you've got something to scribble a few notes down, because you may need these later on. We're going to talk about some specifics of some natural disasters, and you'll need to come back to some of this information later. So make sure you pause and grab yourself something to write on just now. The natural disasters we're going to look at is forest fires, and obviously this was big news at the beginning of the year when there was a lot of information coming about the forest fires that were happening in Australia. Now, these can obviously have a significant impact on biodiversity in terms of destroying habitat and actually harming animals themselves. However, it is also the case that forest fires can be useful in maintaining the natural balance of many forest ecosystems. The fires themselves will clear out some of the dead and dried wood that's around, and indeed there are some seeds which actually require the intense heat of a forest fire in order for germination to occur. However, the biggest issue we have at the moment is that climate change has meant that many forests are much drier than they previously were, and fire is actually a huge threat in areas where it previously wasn't an issue. For example, some of the tropical rainforests and forests which are often covered in clouds normally wouldn't burn on a large scale because it tends to be quite humid and quite moist. However, there are several areas which have been devastated by wildfires, and these large-scale fires make future fires more likely because they leave behind more dead wood, which will increase the available fuel. Now, the increase in forest fires might affect biodiversity in quite a few different ways. First of all, they're a significant source of carbon dioxide, and that obviously contributes further to global warming. And they're going to reduce the massive vegetation around. That may in turn alter the water cycle, affecting marine ecosystems such as coral reefs, lochs, or rivers that might be nearby. The smoke may also, in the short term, reduce photosynthesis and be harmful to both the health of humans and animals. Flooding, on the other hand, is a result of a large amount of rainfall occurring in a short space of time. That can cause rivers to burst their banks and spill water out onto the floodplain. That's usually a heavy volume of water which can cause damage to homes and can also destroy local ecosystems. And here in the UK, we have seen an actual increase in extreme flood events over the last 2 decades, and there's a number of contributing causes to that. Flooding can really have quite a number of effects on the environment. These could be both positive and negative, however. First of all, we have the fact that we've got pollution occurring, so floods are going to wash chemicals and sewage into the water. Contaminated water is going to spread quite quickly over an area. We also have the destruction of habitat, so floods are going to destroy places where river animals or fish even might have breeding grounds. And even slight changes to the temperature and water patterns can upset natural ecosystems. However, there is also some positives. However, there are a few positives. Floods can actually bring some water back to dry areas and ensure that there's water available for irrigation or for drinking water. They can also bring additional organic material back to the soil, and that can provide additional nutrients and minerals for plants. Earthquakes can be quite significant in terms of their impact on biodiversity, depending on where it is that they occur. There's actually more than 3 million earthquakes worldwide every year. However, most of them are actually too weak for us to notice. Stronger earthquakes can cause considerable damage to buildings and populated areas, but also to natural areas. They can also cause significant and serious side effects, like the one that caused the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, which affected over 14 different countries. There are some significant examples of particular earthquakes that have occurred, such as the one in the Sichuan region of China, which happened in May 2008. The area that the earthquake occurred in happens to be designated for biodiversity conservation and contains more than 12,000 plant species. It also includes over 50% of wild giant panda habitat and its population. So 60% of the panda population in China was affected, and nearly a quarter of the habitat was destroyed, with the remainder being broken up into separate areas. That meant that the pandas were then going to struggle to find mates and being able to reproduce. On the other hand, though, we have seen evidence from a similar earthquake which occurred in Chile in 2010. As a result of that earthquake, some beaches subsided and rocky reefs were uplifted. However, there was the result that some of these rocky reefs which were lifted upwards turned into rocky seawalls, which actually protected the beaches and are preventing them from being eroded, and that's allowing some species which had been lost to those ecosystems to return. Finally, looking at strong winds. So we have extreme wind events, obviously, like cyclones and tornadoes, and they're going to cause extensive damage to local ecosystems. It's going to destroy habitats and potentially remove food sources. However, these tend to be quite short term and fairly localised. Ecosystems can recover quite quickly from that type of damage. Of a bigger impact is frequent strong winds, which can have more long-term effects, as it might result in soil erosion. And recovery from this can be quite difficult, as the remaining land can be too infertile for any further plants to come along and recolonise. Obviously, that's then going to affect the food chains of the area and potentially lead to desertification in the long term. The biggest issues that we've had with this is the fact that removal of the natural plant cover has been down to human actions like deforestation, overgrazing, and putting plants where it would otherwise usually be considered unsuitable. So your task just now is to have a wee look at your notes that have been assigned to you on Google Classroom, where you should find this table, or if you need to, copy this table down into your biology jotter. Using the notes you've just taken from the video, or indeed using the fact file that's been posted on Google Classroom for you, you can complete this table stating the impact of these different types of natural disaster on biodiversity of particular areas. If you're interested in learning more, there are some additional links posted on Google Classroom for you to go and watch a few more videos explaining a bit more about each of these in turn. So from that, you should be able to list some different natural disasters, and using one of them, just explain how it can impact biodiversity, both positively and negatively if you can.